So first of all, Mark, I think this is really useful work and a useful framing of the issues, especially given, as you mentioned at the beginning, the resource scarcity issues that we're having, and certainly the pressures that we know are coming on food supply. But what I would like to do is push you a little bit, and of course, being from a research institution, tell you some more research would be interesting. I think one of the themes of this conference has been that we need to be thinking about different farming systems and different varieties, providing varieties of options to farmers in the future, in addition to producing the major staple crops. So one of the things I would like to see is using this same sort of a framework is to actually look at some of the next tier of crops, if I could call it that, legumes, cassava, millet, bananas, quinoa, teff, sorghum. And there may be a challenge, you may not have the data that you would have on maize, rice, and wheat, but I think it would be really interesting since those are the crops that we're hearing are going to be some of the so-called crops for the future to help farmers adapt to the challenges that we see. I'd also like to see an analysis of the, along the lines of what you've done, of the benefits of using, to the extent possible, agricultural biodiversity to help manage pests and diseases. And here I want to be very clear, I'm not talking about organic agriculture per se, but I think we have a lot of potential to use diversity more than we do in a scientific way. And I think doing some analysis of that. I mean, we've found in work that we've done in Uganda and China by simply offering farmers mixed varieties to plant in their fields, we're seeing reduced damage in China sixfold in rice by simply planting 3 varieties of rice instead of 1. So I think it would be useful to understand how much benefit farmers can get from that, what's the income impact on them when they don't have to buy perhaps as much outside inputs into their farming systems. You mentioned in your remarks at the end about needing new cultivars, and certainly we do need new cultivars. We need to continue to do research, but I've mentioned this in a couple of my talks before over the last couple of days, but one of the projects that the Biodiversity is running here in Ethiopia, but in 9 other countries, is called Seeds for Needs. And basically what we've done is gone back into the gene banks of the countries and using GIS modeling and future climate predictions, matched varieties that were already approved, already in those gene banks, to these future climate conditions. Here in Ethiopia, we tested from a sort of a modeling perspective, 400 different varieties of durum wheat, and then we selected 30 or so varieties that we're working with farmers to get their reactions on how those varieties are performing for them in terms of drought tolerance, pest and disease resistance, et cetera. And what's interesting is that we are finding that the yields of some of those land races and some of those, quote, older varieties are outperforming improved durum in more marginal areas. And so I think, again, looking at the impacts of using some of the varieties that we already have that can help farmers sort of adjust to some of these threats that we're seeing, and particularly focusing on the farmers who may be the ones who can't adopt some of the technologies you're talking about for a variety of reasons. The other point I'd like to make, a lot of the crops that we're talking about, sort of these neglected crops or the second-tier crops, we haven't invested any research into improving agronomic practices in those crops. We focused on improving agronomic practices in the major staples. We are organizing a meeting next week with the International Fertilizer Development Council to look at how we can try to find some improved agronomic practices in millet, for example. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done in this area looking at fertilizer applications, looking at timing, looking at what kinds of crop pest control technologies there might be for those crops. But again, this is also saying, we're not talking about organic per se.
Yep.
At all, but we're talking about what happens when you do improve the agronomic practices for these sort of second level crops. How does that fit in with your various parameters there? And then finally, and this is of course getting very complicated, I think one of the other messages we've heard out of the meetings, at least I've been at in the last couple of days, is the need to think more about mixed farming systems. So, livestock pastoral systems, or pastoral and crop systems, tree and crop systems, going forward to enhance resilience. So again, it would be useful to look at that as a technology, as a technological intervention and see how it performs up against the criteria that you have. But I do think this is a very useful structuring and framework, but I can see that the data may be more difficult to get to do the kind of modeling, but I think as a decision tool, it could be very helpful. Thanks.